You're live, Commissioner.
Thank you, Megan. Good morning and welcome to the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session, Thursday, October 29th, 2020. The topic today is Conservation Futures Ranking Criteria. And if you'd like to join in via conference call, the number is 360-252-9020 and your PIN is 1234. I'm John Hutchings, the chair of the board. Also present is Vice Chair Commissioner Ty Menser. Is he? He was. There you are. Okay, good. And we also have the clerk of the board, Amy Davis, and we have Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell. We have CPED Director Josh Cummings here, and his most excellent band of renown and support group with him. And we're waiting to see if Commissioner Edwards chimes in or signs in via phone remotely. So with that, who are we going to turn it over to? Josh?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner.
Yes,
so I am Joshua Cummings, the Director of Community Planning and Economic Development, CPED. I know the commissioners have had a full morning this morning of meetings and appreciate your continued interest and attention to these issues and service to our citizens. This one is regarding conservation futures and the ranking criteria. And this was a board requested briefing to learn more about conservation futures as an overview and then how the criteria is set in determining which projects are scored by the scoring committee and then brought to the Board of County Commissioners. And then hearing what tweaks from the Board of County Commissioners or additions the board might like to have staff explore on the ranking criteria for conservation futures. So the lead briefer on this will be Andy DeFobis, as well as Jennifer Davis and Chris Chapeau. Unless there's any other questions, ready to get started.
Beautiful, thank you. Any questions before we begin, Ty? Okay, Gary, no?
No, sir.
Oh, good. Commissioner Edwards has joined us, good. All right, Andy, you've got it. Thank you.
Great, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and share a presentation. I did make some additional tweaks to the presentation, so it may look a little bit different than the one that you have, and I will make sure Amy gets a copy of that as soon as we're done here today. Okay, I'm sharing, and you are hopefully seeing the slideshow.
Yes.
Great, okay, wonderful. Okay, well, we've got a nice long session here today to fully explore the board's vision for moving forward with conservation futures. I'm going to try to speak a little slower today because we've got some more time. So I'm going to go ahead and give you some overview of the Conservation Futures program, and then we'll go ahead and discuss the program ranking criteria and open it up for board discussion. So Conservation Futures Program is a land preservation program for the protection of a variety of lands within Thurston County. Land purchases are funded via a conservation tax levy for taxpayers, and that funds the acquisition of property or conservation easements on property. So last year, the rate paid by taxpayers was about 4 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. That is under the statutory maximum, which is 6.25 cents per $1,000 assessed value. And then funding decisions are made by the Board of County Commissioners ultimately. So this is a pretty flexible program, and our project sponsors, I know, appreciate that because they're able to use these funds as a source of match for other funding sources. It supports conservation projects for a lot of different entities, such as land trusts or other nonprofits. City governments have sponsored projects, and so has the county as well. And there are multiple project types that have been funded via Conservation Futures, looking at different farmland acquisitions, various fish and wildlife habitat properties, and those that have recreational and educational opportunities for the public. So the Conservation Futures process, I'm going to talk about what we do every year as an annual process that's run like a grant program, essentially. So applications for funds are due before March 1st, and they have to be sponsored by an eligible entity, such as a land trust or city or county government. Those projects are reviewed by a ranking committee that is made up of different advisory board representatives and technical experts. And this year, due to COVID, there were no site visits, but the applicants made presentations to the ranking committee via Zoom. And then that committee took all that information in, ranked all the projects, and then made their recommendations for funding to the Board of County Commissioners. And ultimately, the board selects which projects to fund, which you all did very recently. So just a little bit about the ranking committee. This is the current makeup of the ranking committee. There are currently representatives on there from 3 advisory boards: the Agriculture Advisory Board, Storm and Surface Water Advisory Board, and the Historic Commission. We look to other jurisdictions in the county to help us provide a Parks and Recreation representation because the county no longer has a Parks Board. There is real estate representation on that committee. And then we have technical experts from Thurston Conservation District, the Washington Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. And then we've had 2 biologist positions historically, which have come from a couple different places. U.S. Fish and Wildlife has provided folks, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we also had someone from Thurston Regional Planning Council, I think last year or a couple years ago. So the criteria that this committee is looking at as they score these projects, and it's criteria that is set by the board, and it's a point system. So they're looking at how well the project fits in with the overall program objectives, how time sensitive that project might be if it didn't receive funding, how likely is it that this conservation opportunity could be lost, and then what sort of features or resources are actually on the property to preserve. They look at the certainty that the project would succeed given all the information that they take in. What level of match is provided? We do not require projects to have match, but they do get more points if they're able to show that they're taking conservation futures funds and leveraging them, for greater benefit. And then, does the project include public access? That's another question or another criteria that can receive points on the application. So some statistics for you. Since 1990, we have had 44 projects that have been completed and funded for a total of $18.6 million approximately. And that represents about 5,300 acres. And so those dollar amounts and those acreages, or the dollar amounts that we funded, have been combined with other funds that project sponsors have had over time, and then ultimately used to conserve that amount of acreage. So in the pipeline, including the projects that the board approved this year, there are currently 6 projects that are in various stages of completion. That represents about $1.2 million that has been allocated by the board and has not yet, gone through the process. Their projects are not yet complete. And about another 370 acres will come into that portfolio when those projects are completed. And again, these are a variety of different types of properties. So, we've seen over the years farmland represented, properties that include streams and riparian habitat, Puget Sound shoreline, wetlands, prairie and prairie species, and then properties that provide recreational and educational opportunities, such as some of the trails that the county manages were purchased with conservation futures. That's one example. So there have been adjustments to the ranking criteria in past years that the board has authorized. For the 2019 cycle, the board made additional points available if a project had a connection to the county's prairie habitat conservation plan. There were points made possible depending on where that property sat in relation to the areas that were under or subject to the habitat conservation plan. And then also if there was a potential for mitigation on that property. So if the county could potentially receive, or if credits could be realized from that property, to fund either, or to be attributed to county work, or, projects that landowners were coming into the building development center with. And for the 2020 cycle, so for this most recent year, those habitat conservation plan specific points were removed. And that's when the board set forward this sort of 2-track process that we're currently in, where there is an annual process with all that criteria that we just went over. And then there is an additional $500,000 that the board sets aside specifically for projects related to the habitat conservation plan. And so in 2020, we kind of decoupled those 2 elements at board direction. And so the criteria are able to be changed administratively. It's at the discretion of the Board of County Commissioners to tell staff what they want to see. And so the board is able to respond to any emerging conservation needs or any areas of advanced public interest. Some examples of that could be looking at an emphasis on salmon recovery or prioritizing more threatened farmland. We've heard about both of those in the recent past. For the sake of this briefing and because it's been discussed before, we went ahead and brought some information forward on the salmon side of things. So again, the board could direct staff to make changes to those criteria if they wish. Some of the things the board could look at is changing the criteria to specifically include salmon in the list of sensitive species to kind of draw a focus on that, provide additional points for projects that have some salmon restoration element. And also, looking at that ranking committee and seeing if they want to specifically have more of a salmon focus with the folks that come on there. And this is just one example of a direction the board could go. There are certainly other things the board could consider, but brought this forward just based on the conversations we've heard recently. So that's about it for my presentation. The next steps would be to take whatever questions the board has, let the board discuss and provide any direction to staff if there are changes desired for the ranking criteria for the next funding cycle, with our goal being to put any changes in place by the end of the year so that when we advertise for the 2021 round, we can make it very clear what the criteria are as folks are preparing their applications. And with that, I have any questions you might have.
Andy, I'm sorry, could you go back to that last slide and expound a little more on the CAO? Salmon is currently already covered.
Yes. So one of the, and I have a, well, I won't unhide it, but so yes. So salmon are already addressed in the ranking criteria. So there is there are points available for critical and sensitive lands, and that includes habitat that supports any species that are federally listed or state listed or otherwise covered in the county's critical areas ordinance. And so just the fact that there would be like a Puget Sound salmon run on a property on the Nisqually River, for example, they would receive points under that. Currently, salmon are not specifically listed on the ranking form, but they could be on there. That is a little bit less of a driver of change, but it is a tweak we could make to that ranking criteria. Some of those other things you see there would provide more of a weighted benefit to salmon, but that is a change that could be made, and so that's why it's on this slide.
Very interesting. Commissioner Minster, comments or questions or suggestions?
Yeah, so my concern is that it's based on two factors. One is the statute RCW 8434-240 starts out with two sentences. Conservation futures are a useful tool for counties to preserve lands of public interest for future generations. Counties are encouraged to use some conservation futures as one tool for salmon preservation purposes. So it's not a mandate, but it's an encouragement, and it's called out specifically in the statute right up front. So when you add that with the fact that we have taken $500,000 a year and set it aside for HCP, you get an imbalance. So we've got, in my view, we have to do something in order to satisfy the statute or meet the aspirations of it. We need to do something extra to make sure that that $500,000 that's not earmarked for the prairie gets specifically targeted towards salmon projects, or at least a bump in that direction. And it can't be just sensitive species, because it's the salmon versus the prairie species. We have a lot of threatened and sensitive prairie species. So if we just say you get extra points for habitat for sensitive species, that's going to also give a bump to prairie. So I want to see something that takes that $500,000 we're not spearheading for a prairie, and either whether it's giving a deduction for a prairie project because they're already getting $500,000 of the conservation futures to begin with, or it's an additional points. I don't care which way, but I think that's how it has to go, because otherwise, we're not doing what statute is directing us to do. And again, we don't have to, but I care a lot about salmon recovery. I'm on a subcommittee with the Salmon Recovery Council to figure out how we can use additional tools. It's hard to raise taxes or raise additional revenue. We're trying to figure out ways to, we're failing in Puget Sound salmon recovery. and we need to find different tools that are more readily available to us. This is one that's right here in the statute, and I totally support what the board has done with prairie species and trying to reduce costs of the HCP for property owners that are going to apply and are basically going to get a public subsidization of their project. I support that. But the counterbalance is we have to take the rest of the money and I think give a bump to salmon specific projects, not just sensitive species habitat projects.
Mhm.
That's my pitch.
Is subsidization a word?
If it is a word, I have a heck of a time saying it.
I like it. Is there any from staff any comment or suggestion or recommendation to address what the Commissioner Mentor is saying?
I guess what I would say, I'll jump in real quick in terms of facilitation. The reason we have so much time is to have this exact conversation. So I think chunking it out in terms of the overall program, if the commissioners have any questions about the overall conservation features program, and then as Andy suggested in his presentation, diving more deeply into the criteria, that might be a useful way to use our time.
Okay, thank you. And I've got some questions, but I'm going to turn to Commissioner Edwards, see if he has anything. Gary?
Well, I'm going to find it hard to argue with Commissioner Mentor about this particular issue. So I don't think we're going to have a lot of discussion.
Okay.
I almost think we're kind of on the same sheet of music. My concern is the burden to taxpayers that are affected by the prairie issue, but I also want to cover the salmon.
Yeah. And I'm no pun intended, in the same boat as well. You mentioned right up front that applications are due no later than March 1st. Where's the weasel room in there? There's a however, isn't there?
Always, or not always, but in this case, yes. So that is, again, these projects that come through that annual cycle track, we have just set that over time as an administrative date. I don't want to say it's arbitrary, but it can be changed. That's how we have done it, and that sets us up on the schedule of viewing projects in the spring, bringing them before the board for a decision in the summer. So it could be changed if the board wishes to do so, and if you think there's a good reason to do so. And the other piece of that, the other side of the house, with anything that's related to the habitat conservation plan, we don't have a deadline on that. If there's an opportunity that comes available to the county, we will work on it. And I don't know if Chris wants to say anything more about that, but just to differentiate the two. So the annual cycle, we have that deadline. There is no cycle. It's an ongoing review on an as-needed basis for anything HCP related.
So it sounds like rather than arbitrary, it's flexible. For example, if funding comes back, somebody couldn't use it, they've been awarded funding, it comes back, we're going to act on it elsewhere, I would think, or open it up again.
Right. Yeah. If a project is funded but ultimately does not come to fruition, then those funds never left the county's coffers, and they are available for the use of the board as the board sees fit.
Right. And looking at the makeup of the ranking committee, is there a specific reason, there might be, why there's the tribe, we don't have tribal representation?
I'm not sure. So the ranking committee as it exists now was set up in 2010. The last tweak to the membership of that committee that I'm aware of was when that real estate voice was added in 2015. And so that is absolutely something that's at the board's discretion to add folks or voices to that committee. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that would be critical to support what Commissioner Mentor is suggesting. Emphasizing salmon. Then the last question I have, it's more of kind of a statement question. The HCP set aside is $500,000 a year currently, and what is the balance of our account, Robin? Is it like 3 million, 3.5 million, 5 million?
I would have to look.
Okay, that's somewhere in that range, 3 to 5 million.
Off the top of my head, I don't have that.
Okay, that's all I have. Go ahead, Ty.
I think we can keep it really simple, given that my teammates are kind of on the same page. I mean, I don't have any problem with the makeup of the committee. I'm not looking to change that makeup. I think there's you've got a wide range of folks on there. And I do remember the complexity here is that I do remember here in our last set of rankings that we did that there was I forget what it was called, the James Farm or something like there are prairie or related projects that they're not going to cut HCP muster or whatever or B points for but there may be something that we want to do. So I'm not trying to necessarily take those out of contention necessarily. So I think it could just be as simple as Andy's suggestion to just add call out an additional point bump or something that relates to salmon recovery that has a salmon recovery component, and just that's it. Like that may get us where we need to go.
It should be a nice compliment to the barrier removals as well.
I'm looking at the score sheet right now. It's maybe it's just removed. Maybe it's just replacing 4A with and just limiting that to a salmon related bump or something like that. I don't know. I would whatever Andy's suggestion is. I guess. I mean, I don't want to unduly weight it because there's a lot of considerations about the quality of the project, but.
Would just adding salmon to that list be sufficient, or does that get lost?
Well, no. I mean, I just think that it gets lost. It needs to be advantaged versus other potential because most of the ones listed out here are prairie species, and I don't want to just list salmon as another example. I actually wanted to get a substantive bump.
Okay.
So I think we're dealing with all of those species. We're setting aside half of our conservation futures, and even though the projects may not match up, the things that we do for the HCP are definitely going to meet that need. They're going to satisfy that. They're going to check that box of creating additional habitat for Mazama pocket gopher, Oregon vesper sparrow, Taylor's checker spot butterfly, and Oregon spotted frog. So I think that I'm just trying to keep it as simple as possible. You could replace that and just say, you get if the site preserves critical sensitive land, or the site preserve. I like to keep it kind of broad and let the committee chew on it. A salmon recovery related goal, then there's a 5-point tip for that. Period.
Jennifer or Chris, do you have anything to add?
No, I think what I'm hearing is to add some bonus points for projects that support our salmon recovery goals. It could be as simple as that, and staff's happy to make that as administrative change. Get that ready for the 2021 cycle. I don't think that's that complicated. I don't know if there was other input that you were hearing, Commissioner Mentzer, from the Salmon Recovery Council, who I know is looking at conservation futures programs across the region as a tool for implementing salmon recovery. I think this probably fits the bill of what they're asking for or looking at. I didn't know if there are any other specifics or models they had presented to you in that discussion.
No, I mean, I don't think so. And I'm just kind of taking off from sort of that as a springboard. I mean, we're in a unique position with our HCP and, every jurisdiction, the conservation futures, what I learned in the subcommittee was that this conservation futures programs are, very variable around the state. Every county, even the counties that have implemented them have set different rates and different amounts of tax, and so they're hard to compare in a sense. There's not just one formula that is being pushed or whatever. They're just saying, let's take a look at our programs one by one, how you have to do it, and see where we can get some additional resources for salmon recovery. I mean, again, and I just think it's be one thing if I was pushing, it's right in the statute. That's why I'm being, that's why I feel so comfortable saying that this is appropriate. It's right in the conservation futures statute. And so I just think it makes sense.
And I'm trying to picture different applications coming in. And if there was if there was a separate call out to salmon, it seems like any property, and it's a wide brush, any property along rivers would get 4A, they would probably get a bump because of the butterfly or sparrow and such, but then they'd get another bump for ranked points for salmon, which would outdo or overdo the working lands and agriculture characteristics. Or would it just balance out, or is it just, I don't know if you know what I mean. I'm probably not being very.
If I can jump in there, I think there's two things that would happen there. So that criteria 4A includes, again, all those species that are listed or in the critical areas ordinance. So it is prairie species, it is salmon species, it's anything else that is sensitive species or habitat. So you could see points for that. So a property along the river that has a salmon run would get points under that because it's got the habitat. Then the question is there additional points that could be available because perhaps salmon recovery is part of the planned project, or that specific property is, you can point to a variety of recovery plans around the region and say this reach of the river is included in there. So either the opportunity is there, or it's a planned element of that project, and perhaps they've got funding for it or something like that.
Josh?
So Andy, would it be like a call out to say like 4B salmon recovery?
It could be. So we'll look at the specific how to change the form, but in some essence, adding a salmon recovery piece, that's I think that's what my brain is going on. And whether that's opportunity based on its location or whether it's an element of the project, we can kind of go back and discuss that as a team.
And then back to Commissioner Mintzer's kind of question on what would be a good point value to establish for that call out that doesn't overweight it, but does provide weight.
I would say the 1 to 5 is already there, because you're just adding another criteria that if one project has it and another doesn't, it's going to get those points, but it's not overshadowing it. It's not giving it 10 points or 15 points or something like that.
Commissioner Mintzer, how does that sound?
Live with that. You mean, and then, I see it adds up to 50, and then that's a nice round number, but would that mean it would add up to 55?
It would, but that number.
That's fine. I'm making sure that's what you're describing.
Yeah, it would, and that's fine. I mean, again, when we had some of that more HCP specific stuff in there, the points available was higher than it is now, and that's okay. There's a round number is nice, but it's not. I don't think it's crucial. So. Yeah,
I think that sounds reasonable to me.
Well, there were several projects coming in. I'm just looking at the details. Significant projects come in, 2 or 3 applications come in there, and they actually kick the scoring up because of their salmon and the other critical sensitive lands, to the point where something that might have historical or cultural significant lands or markers would eventually get aced out, and they would never be ranked higher. I don't mean ranked higher, but have a fighting chance or spawning up in the scoring. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. It'd be heavier weighted toward the salmon and the critical sensitive lands, but something with a historical marker or significance they're always going to be at the bottom of the pile. Could that happen?
So they're looking outside of that criteria number 4, which has all these various resources on the property. There's all the other criteria that the project has to score well in. There's the public access piece, there's the project certainty, there's the leverage, all these other things. And so potentially there are more points available, yes, to a project that, if it's on the river, it's got salmon and it's part of a salmon recovery plan, that's going to have more points potentially than something with a historic cultural element, all other things being equal. But there are those other pieces that each of these projects goes through. So it's hard to say without looking at the applications and saying, well, this one had historic and it had everything else was great. And this one was salmon, but it didn't have a high likelihood of success, and there was no leverage, and time is not of the essence, et cetera. So there's a lot of moving parts there.
There is, I'm sensitive to the 4A, to the critical species, but also to salmon, of course, but not at the detriment of other applications never being able to score high enough.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner, I do think that the process that we're engaged in right now if there is ever a notification of overbalance or out of balance, the commissioners have this opportunity to have a conversation just like this to address that.
Okay.
Out of balance. So we're kind of in it. Go for it, Robin.
I would
Yeah.
also say that it's the prerogative of the board to shape this program so
Yep.
that it's weighted toward whatever your priorities are. Early on in the program, there was a weighting toward agriculture.
Yep.
Then it was prairie habitat. Now, if you want to weight it toward salmon, that's your choice. And as long as you're doing it, I think in with a lot of awareness that that's the priority that you're setting, that is totally up to the board.
Okay. Well, I like Ty's suggestion or staff suggestion, adding salmon. Gary, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm good with it as well. Hey, I did just have one other real quick thing, going all the way back to Andy's introduction was, Andy, when you mentioned the millions of dollars over the years that have put into this, did that include other money, or was that just from Conservation Futures?
That's just from Conservation Futures. So we often see that the county's money that goes into these projects is only a portion of the overall project total. So it might be $1 million project,
Right.
but the ask for futures might be $250,000 if they've got other sources.
Okay. No, I think we're kind of lined out on this.
I agree. Go ahead, Ty. Anything further? No. Okay. We got 3 thumbs up.
Okay.
Staff, anything else from the commission? From the board?
I don't think so. I mean, we will go ahead and make that change, and we will have that criteria. That's what we'll put out for 2021.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The meeting.
Thank you.
All right. We're adjourning then. Thank you. Josh, you in your office?
I am not, but I can be.
No, that's fine. I just have something to show you, have something for you to read, but anytime. Doesn't have to be now.
Excellent.
All
See you
right.
soon.
Talk to you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.